On this call. So it's very exciting that we have so much interest in this conversation. If you are not already muted, please go ahead and do so. If you're a speaker, go ahead and mute yourself until it's your opportunity to speak. Give folks one more minute and then we'll get launched. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm Nancy Olson. I'm the CEO at the Greater Eureka Chamber of Commerce, and we are very excited to have this first, this kind of launch event for a new series that we have called Conversations with Leaders. Conversations with Leaders will be an ongoing program exclusively for Eureka Chamber members. And through this program, we will be introducing our members to folks who are making things happen, making big things happen in our community, addressing community needs, that kind of thing. So just as a heads up, our next conversation will be at the end of February. We'll be sharing that date soon in the next couple of days. And that one will be with the City of Eureka and Eureka Police Department to address issues related to business security and how the city and others in the community are addressing issues related to the unhoused and making sure that our community is safe and making sure that business security concerns are addressed to the best of everybody's ability. So that's our next one. Like I said, at the end of February. But this one, we are thrilled that we have such a great number of folks who are participating today, both as speakers and as participants. I will introduce speakers in just a moment, but want to invite everyone, if you would like to introduce yourselves in chat and your name and what business you're with, and maybe just a quick note about why you're interested in this topic of offshore wind. So I see a couple people and I can guess what your interests are, but a lot of you may just be curious. Some of you, one person may say, my sister told me to join, and we might have other people who have really significant business interests. So go ahead and put your names and your companies in the chat if you are so inclined. How today will work is I will be the facilitator for today. We have a number of speakers, so there will be quite a lot of conversation and information coming to you. Encourage you to have a pen and paper or have something opened on your computer so you can take notes, because there will be some really interesting data and next steps that will be available to you in this conversation. Our goal for this morning, or this afternoon, sorry, is to provide folks with kind of a 101 of offshore wind, what it means for our community, what stage we're at, what we can expect in the years ahead, and some about the impact that it's expected to have on our region, in addition to more electricity and sustainable energy. If you have questions during the presentations, please go ahead and note them or you can put them in the chat, and if possible, we'll have one of our speakers respond to them. So if you are a speaker, so I'm looking at Rob, Matthew, Scott will be with us, Ross, Erin, I think Christian's with us, and who else is with us? And Jeff, if you are, open to answering questions in chat, please go ahead and do so. We will have about 15 to 20 minutes for question and answers at the end. We have so much information to share. We want to go ahead and do that at the end rather than doing so during the conversation to not disrupt it. But rest assured, we will have other conversations with leaders on this topic and looking at partnering with folks like with the SBDC and others to have even broader community conversations about this topic in the months and years ahead. So know that this is not your only opportunity to get this information. So with that, hopefully I covered all the bases that I intended to, but again, just if you have questions while somebody is speaking, go ahead and put a question in the chat. We'll do our best to track those. And then, some of those might be answered by our speakers real time. We will be capturing the chat. And, if we miss anything, we'll make sure to follow up with folks. We are recording this also, just as a heads up. And we will probably share this recording as well. If you have any challenges with that, let us know. But with that, I think we're on time, and let's go ahead and get going. So I am glad to introduce our first speaker, who is Rob Holmlund, who's with the Humboldt Bay Harbor District. And Rob is going to provide you with just some offshore wind basics, kind of a 101 of what this is, and some of the things that are happening right now. So Rob, you should have ability to go ahead and share your screen at this time.
Great. Thanks, Nancy, and welcome everyone. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to dive right into this. I've been asked to cover the basics of offshore wind to give context to the other speakers, and I'm also going to be sharing the Humboldt Bay Harbor District's project. So I'm the development director for the Harbor District, and let's dive right into this. So why offshore wind? What is the impetus for offshore wind? It's really all about the end of the coming end of carbon-based power. So the President's office and the White House have announced their intention just this past July to implement a bold goal of deploying 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by the year 2030. So for those of you that don't know, what is a gigawatt? Simple way of thinking about it is a gigawatt can power, say, up to 500,000 homes. I've seen even estimates that it can power 1 million homes. So 30 gigawatts, we're talking about 15 million homes. There are about 14 million homes in the state of California, about 7 million homes in the state of Florida, about 11 million homes in Texas. So this is a substantial portion of the overall portfolio of energy production in the United States. And just for context, in the year 2020, there was a global total of 35 gigawatts in the whole world of offshore wind. And so the US is saying we want to effectively double that. Obviously, the rest of the world is going to be continuing to deploy offshore wind as well. But just giving you context that effectively right now, there's 35 gigawatts and the US wants to add another 30. So I'll talk more about the two coasts of the US, but let's just zoom in on California and continue this conversation of why offshore wind. So the state of California has a goal of achieving 100% clean electricity in the state by the year 2045. And so there's this incremental step of goals to get towards 100% clean renewable energy by 2045. And that consists of a pretty diverse portfolio of energy production. So for example, There's a series of years and goals for utility scale solar, big solar plants that produce electricity, as well as goals for rooftop mounted solar for individual, either homes or businesses. Among this portfolio is geothermal and onshore wind, and offshore wind is among this portfolio. And until recently, the state's goal was to have 10 gigawatts by the year 2045. But just recently, a couple of months ago, maybe 6 months ago, the state changed its goals so that by 2030, the state wants to have 5 gigawatts of offshore wind, and by 2045, have 25 gigawatts of offshore wind. So where is offshore wind going to happen? Where will it occur? Well, on the East Coast, this is already well underway. There are 27 of these sub areas. Each one of these little colored blocks are a couple hundred square mile portions of the ocean that the federal government is either leased or is in the process of leasing to energy companies to install offshore wind farms. On the West Coast, there are only 2 that have been auctioned and 2 that are planned. And so why so much activity on the East Coast relative to the West Coast? Well, it comes down to the depth of the oceans, and this is kind of blurry down here, but if we look at what's called bathymetry, or the depth of the ocean, on the East Coast, this teal color is relatively shallow waters, and it takes hundreds of miles before the ocean really gets very deep on the East Coast.
Rob,
yes.
it appears that not everyone can see your screen.
Okay.
I can see it, but I wonder if it's just the settings for some folks, or if some folks just came in. If you want to reshare, that would be great. Sorry to interrupt you.
Nope, I'm glad to help. Let's see. How about now? Can you see my screen at least, Nancy? Hello, hello.
Looks good to me.
Okay, thanks. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to keep going. I think we are exploring the possibility of doing a similar presentation in the future. There will be a lot of public meetings about the district's project, at least. So I think this information will be out there. But Nancy,
Rob,
let me know.
Sorry, there is something covering part of your screen. There's a big white block over it.
I'm not sure what to do about that.
It wasn't there before, so.
Oh, well, the white block, yeah, that's just part of the presentation.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, because offshore wind doesn't apply to Wyoming, so I just cut out those states. To simplify this map, it's really 2 maps that I patched together. Okay, so we've got the East Coast with 27 offshore wind lease areas and the West Coast with 4. And the reason why is got to do with bathymetry, so the depth of the ocean. On the West Coast, you can see there, except for around San Francisco Bay, the ocean pretty much just drops off and gets really deep right away. And so that is why the East Coast is so far ahead of the West Coast in offshore wind. And it really comes down to this: in shallower waters like the East Coast of the US, you can do a monopole, or effectively a wind turbine, just like based in land. It just happens to stick out of the water. And if you get a little bit deeper, it gets a little more complicated, but still it's anchored to the ground and sticking out of the water. But when the water gets deep enough, you have to go to these floating platforms that the wind turbines are on, and then those are moored to the ocean floor with large cables. And so, long story short, East Coast, we're talking primarily about shallow water monopoles, which is a lot easier to manufacture and deploy than West Coast floating offshore wind. And so that's why the offshore wind industry is really just getting started on the West Coast. This is a much more complex logistical and technological feat. So looking at the West Coast, this past December, the federal government auctioned off 2 areas that were broken into 5 sub areas, 2 in the north, 3 in the south. You've got the Humboldt call area in the north and the Morro Bay call area. And if we look at wind resources, so the brighter the red, the better the wind resources are. So this is speed and consistency, I think, and a number of other factors. So there in that star is Humboldt Bay. We've got the Humboldt offshore wind area just off of the Humboldt coast, and then the Morro Bay wind area. And you can see the Morro Bay wind area is in a much lower wind resource area than the Humboldt Bay. And it's really from San Francisco north is where the best wind is. And then the federal government has announced that they plan on auctioning off 2 more areas in Southern Oregon at the end of this calendar year. And you can also see on the map, the very two best locations in the US for offshore wind are just north and south of Humboldt Bay. So Humboldt Bay is really in the center of all of this action. So this graphic here kind of summarizes what happened this past December. So we've got these two call areas, the Humboldt and the Morro Bay. And you can see, zooming in on those, that they're broken into sub areas and they're color coded. So you've got blue, pink, purple, green, orange, and those correspond to these companies that won auctions of each of those 5 sub areas. So RWE, and each of these companies correspond to these maps by color, collectively bid and are offering the federal government nearly or over $750 million to reserve these areas to install offshore wind farms. Now, there's a lot of work to get to those, so let's just talk about what is offshore wind. So effectively, you've got a power plant that's in the ocean, and all of these individual turbines are all strung together under the water with transmission cables that then all come together in a net or a grid that then is transmitted onto shore. So here's another version of that. So if we zoom in, you've got these floating offshore wind turbines that are moored to the ocean floor, strung together with power cables that go to an offshore substation. So it's just like an onshore substation, but floating on a barge. And then that is transmitted to an onshore substation, and the power is transmitted just like any other power plant. So looking at the floaters, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner of this picture, there's a person down there. So these floating islands that the turbines are placed upon are really large. You're talking about an 8-story building and 400 feet on each side of this triangle. So these are really large. So just for context, if you were to take that floater and put it on the Arcata Plaza, that's about the size of it, or Redwood Bowl in Eureka, the stadium, that's about how big it is, or the Fortuna River Lodge relative scale. And of course, these floaters come in dozens or several dozens of different kinds of designs. So what I'm showing is really just a stock version, but there are a lot of different kinds of versions of these floaters. So in addition to the floaters, we've got blades. The nacelle is that central part that all the blades connect to. The tower, we talked about the floater. Then there's the mooring lines that connect these to the ocean floor, the anchors that hold them to the ocean floor, the transmission cables between the turbines that come onto land. So those are all the primary components. So how many of these need to be manufactured? Well, there's a lot of individual parts that need to be manufactured for it to all come together into a single wind farm. So just for example, if we look at just the mooring lines, which is the cables that hold the floaters to the ocean floor, the state's goal is to have 20 gigawatts of offshore winds. And if each turbine is 15 megawatts, then there's going to be about 1,300 of these turbines providing that power to California. Each one of them probably is going to have 3 mooring lines. That's 4,000 lines, each one of which is 3,000 feet long, for a total of 12 million feet, or a total of over 2,000 miles of these mooring lines that need to be manufactured. And they're pretty substantial. Mooring lines can be chains or synthetic cables, but it's a pretty substantial new industry that's really going to need to be developed. And that's just the lines that hold the floaters to the ocean floor. Then you've got the blades. So we've got 1,300 floaters, 1,300 nacelles, 4,000 blades, 800,000 feet of towers, and miles of transmission cables. So this is a whole new series of industries that need to be developed on the West Coast. All of this stuff is really too large to ship by train. So the East Coast and West Coast are likely to have very different supply chains. So you've got a whole suite of industries associated with manufacturing, with installation, and with the operation and maintenance and service of these turbines. So how is this done? How are these made? How are they manufactured? And then how do they get to their operational location in the ocean? Well, if we start at the end, this is the very last step. It's called vertical assembly, where you take all the parts of the large crane and a large wharf, and you assemble it all together. It has to be done in the water, but from the land or from a wharf, given the weight and size and complexity of these. And just for scale and information, the capacity, the bearing capacity, the strength of these wharves is somewhere between 5 and 10 times the strength of a standard shipping container wharf. And there are none currently on the West Coast that are large enough to do this. So they're going to have to be custom built for this purpose. So looking at all of the various components of this, the things in yellow can be manufactured effectively anywhere in the world and shipped to the vertical assembly site, whereas the things in red really need to be relatively close to the offshore wind farm location. So you've got the floaters, the heavy lift crane, and the terminal. That needs to be relatively local, whereas the other parts could be from anywhere in the world that we're advocating for local jobs and local supply chain. So the blades, while they're really enormous, couldn't fit inside of a baseball stadium. They can be shipped from anywhere in the world. The tower sections can be broken down into small components or large components that can be shipped. So they can be manufactured on site or shipped from anywhere in the world. The nacelles can be as big as a house, but they can be shipped from anywhere in the world. But the floaters are really just too large to be, say, manufactured entirely in the Philippines and then towed across the entire ocean. It's technically feasible, but very unlikely. And so the floaters are likely to be a more local, at least California-based business. They're so large that they have to be pushed across the ground like the space shuttle, inch by inch, onto a floating platform, a floating semi-submersible barge that sinks underneath of it. Then the floater's floating, the barge gets out of the way, the floater's moved over, the barge comes back up to the surface of the water, and you can launch another one. And then once it's vertically assembled and all the parts are put together, then it's towed out to its location. So San Francisco Bay is out. Any port with a bridge is out. These are just simply too tall. The floater, once it's fully assembled, is taller than the top of the bridge here. So the bridge deck is just much too low for it to be manufactured vertically assembled in San Francisco. That's called a vertical draft restriction. So this graphic shows the evolution of wind turbines over time, with 1990 on the far left and then a hypothetical future maximum on the far right. And the turbines that we're planning for somewhere in this range, 15 megawatts. This one here, I think, is 12 or 13 megawatts. So you can see the Golden Gate Bridge in the background. This is simply too large to tow out. So there's restrictions on which ports can handle this. And looking at, there's a lot of studies about this, but the National Renewable Energy Lab has done some estimates on supply chain, and they determined that about 52% of the jobs and the employment is going to be in the floating platforms. And so, the sites that can do, the ports that can do vertical assembly are really going to be critical to the overall picture. All right, so who is going to build these turbines? Well, you've got the offshore wind farm operations, and then you've got these offshore wind component manufacturing and deployment centers. And these are separate projects, very disconnected from one another. This is the Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and energy companies that are leasing from BOEM to operate these wind farms. This is going to be ports and port operators that develop these sites and construct the turbines. And there can be multiple of these port operation sites on the West Coast, and each one can supply to any one of the offshore wind farms, and any one of the farms can get their parts and their vertically assembled turbines from any one of the ports. So they can be mixed and matched to some degree. So you've got San Diego down here in the south, a little far from the farms that have been identified, and pretty far from any wind resources, and so likely not to be doing vertical assembly. They'll probably have a role in shipbuilding and production of floaters. LA and Long Beach are pretty full, but Long Beach has got an ambition to do vertical assembly at some point in the future. They've got a video they just released last week. Port of Hueneme, their port, their entrance is a little narrow and not quite deep enough to do floaters, likely, at least at the large scale. So there's interest in Port Hueneme, but their capacity is probably relatively limited. Port of Morro Bay, too narrow, too shallow, probably to play a substantial role. That they can probably have an important role in operation and maintenance. Port of San Francisco can't do vertical assembly, but probably will have a role in manufacturing. Port of Humboldt, I'll talk more about. Port of Crescent City can certainly play a role. Port of Coos Bay. All of these ports will likely play some role in all of this. But remember, there's component manufacturing, there's the staging and integration, and there's operation and maintenance. So generally, the philosophy that we've taken is there's enough wind to go around. And the Port of Humboldt, we're really focusing on staging and integration and specializing in that. There's enough wind to go around. So, while this is competitive to some degree, there's also really a spirit of cooperation here. So looking at the Humboldt Bay project, one important point, and I kind of made this earlier, is if you look at the Port of Humboldt in a 450-mile radius from Humboldt, you've got the Humboldt call area, the Morro Bay call area, and the two Oregon ones. But even if the Humboldt Bay one went away, there's still a lot of viability for the Humboldt Bay project because there are so few ports that can do the vertical assembly. Even without the offshore wind area just off our coasts, Humboldt Bay would still play a critical role. And if you took away the Humboldt call area here, there's still the two best wind resources on the West Coast, just north and south of us. And if the state's going to hit those goals that they have identified of 20 gigawatts, it's inevitable that there's going to be more call areas north and south of Humboldt. And so we're still centrally positioned with or without the offshore wind just off our coast. Not to imply that that's going to happen. That's not going to be removed likely, but even if it were, the Humboldt would still play a role, which is a way of saying we're going to play a role not just in the Humboldt offshore wind area, but in all of the call areas that are announced, leased, and in the future. All right, so looking at Humboldt Bay, for those of you that stare at maps all day like I do, here's Humboldt Bay, there's Eureka right here in the center, Arcata and Cal Poly Humboldt are up here in the north, College of the Redwoods down here in the south, and the Wiyot tribe and Tierra La Rancheria just on the south end of the bay. And if we zoom in and turn north to the right, we overlay this map that we've been using for a while here just to plan out and look at the overall bay. So if we zoom in on this part here, our bay entrance is really wide, 48 feet deep, and that transitions to a 38-foot deep channel, 400-foot wide pinch point at its narrowest. And then these purple areas are coastal dependent industrially zoned lands that formerly served mostly the lumber industry, timber industry, and are now largely vacant, underutilized, and have a lot of capacity. Among those purple areas is this green site, which is the district's project. So zooming in on that. This is a conceptual plan that's been developed, and it's the basis of our project description that we're evaluating. And just for context, it's kind of hard to look at this and understand how large this site is. So if you take that purple outline, which is the outline of our project area, and overlay it on Old Town, downtown Eureka, up here is the Eagle House. Over here is the Open Door Health Clinic. So imagine walking, and I have walked our entire site a couple of times. Imagine walking from, say, Jack Seafood all the way over to the Open Door Health Clinic or the Beret Center over here. It's a really big site. So back to our site. It consists of, a concept of manufacturing the production of floaters and the vertical assembly. So you're talking about some forms of manufacturing on site, the production of these floaters on site, and then the vertical assembly. And we call this scenario one. It effectively serves one company that's doing everything all together on this site. Another scenario that we've explored, called scenario three, is to do just vertical assembly for 3 different companies. They'd have to take care of their own floaters, but you're doing vertical assembly of 3 different companies on the site simultaneously. And there might not be enough space for that, so we're also then evaluating what we call scenario 2, which is vertical assembly and the production of floaters for 2 different side-by-side companies on this site. And perhaps there'd be room for some component manufacturing. So we're exploring all of those scenarios in our project. So coming to an end here, this is the project area. This is what the site currently looks like. And looking from the north, looking south, this is what it looks like. So we'd effectively be talking about a large wharf here, removing this old redwood dock that would become water. And then this would be, it's called the yard. It's a large, tarmac effectively, and then 2 cranes. And this could be split up, this wharf, and slid up and down the coast here. We're trying to optimize its location. So thanks to a grant from the California Energy Commission of over $10 million and some money from the State Lands Commission and a lot of effort and investment from the Harbor District, we've completed most of the studies that are required up to this point, to the technical studies. And we have just recently signed an agreement with Crowley Wind Services, who you'll meet in a moment, who is going to be operating the site and really be our public-private partner from this point forward. So there's a lot of project benefits anticipated. We're going to be a leader in energy decarbonization and addressing climate change here in Humboldt. There's going to be a vast diversity of new jobs and economic development, redevelopment and revitalization of this vacant and blighted site, stimulation of other projects around the bay, an opportunity to create a green port, electrification, on-site renewable energy generation, green buildings, an opportunity to implement first of its kind project and preparing for sea level rise. So we've done a lot of sea level rise analysis of the site, stimulating a 12-month all-season port through increased ship traffic and more attention from the Corps for dredging. New revenue to the Harbor District that can be used for dredging, conservation, recreation, and other functions of the Harbor District, and potentially tourism. You're going to be able to see this being manufactured from the boardwalk in Eureka, and so it could drive tourism. So last thing here, in 2023, we plan on doing CEQA NEPA permits. There's going to be a lot of opportunity for public engagement, and CEQA notice of preparation will be released later this year. There's going to be a lot of stakeholder meetings for this project, a lot of regulatory meetings, and we anticipate completing CEQA and NEPA in 2024. And I think I'll leave it at that. Nancy, would you like me to introduce Jeff with Crowley? All right, so hopefully Jeff's out there. Jeff Andreini with Crowley, who is the new partner of the Harbor District, and there he is. And Jeff, I believe you have 5 minutes.
All right, thanks, Rob. Nancy, were you looking for a presentation? I wasn't aware of that, or can I talk, or just
not necessary. You can just
Okay.
go ahead and share just briefly about your role in the project and anything else you'd like this audience to know.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you very much, and thank you again, Rob, for the introduction. So a little about me, Vice President of Wind Services. I've been so now for 3 years when we started up the business back in 2020. I've been with Crowley for 44 years, the only company that I have ever worked for, and have worked in San Francisco, LA, Seattle, Jacksonville, Houston, and now domiciled up in Providence, Rhode Island, where we have our main offices for offshore. Crowley, just so people know, is a company that was founded about 130 years ago and has its roots in San Francisco. 3 generations of owners, well over $4 billion in revenues, and today headquartered in Jacksonville, Florida, with just about 7,000 employees, 60% of those who are mariners. Crowley's objective in offshore wind is to be a full-service turnkey provider, both on the construction installation side, operations and maintenance, strategic verticals and marine terminals, assets that are used for transportation, as you can see behind me, operations and maintenance, which mainly focuses on a fully compliant Jones Act relationship that we have with ESVAT, a Danish provider of SOVs, service operation vessels. We have just won our first SOV contract with Siemens Gamesa to be able to support for 15 years the project in Virginia for Dominion Energy. We also participate in the construction and installation side of the house, doing things like logistics for cable lay and also for aggregate. And then lastly, on the 4PL side, it's a supply chain where we are connecting vendors, suppliers together in more of a control tower aspect to bring services, products to the market, not only just on the East Coast, but hopefully on the West Coast as well. As Rob mentioned, we are very pleased and happy to be partners with the Harbor District and the community. This is something that we've been working on for well over 1.5 to 2 years with the Harbor District. First time I went out there and met Larry and the team, we knew this is somewhere we wanted to start our business on the West Coast. Today we do have operations on the East Coast and also in the Gulf of Mexico. On the East Coast, just for everybody's information, today we own and operate 42 acres in the city of Salem on behalf of Avangrid and Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners. Obviously, the 168 acres in Humboldt, we have another 43 acres that we'll announce in the state of Louisiana in March. Working right now on 60 acres in the state of New York. That should be announced hopefully in March as well. And then another project that we're working on in the state of North Carolina. And so the purpose there is just to let everybody know that this isn't our first opportunity around terminal management. It is something that Crowley does outside the wind space. We have over 19 terminals that we manage today. But from the wind side, this is our second major project that we have taken on. We're excited to be working together with the Harbor District. Not only do we see Humboldt, the terminal itself, as this nexus or this North Star base of operations, we see it as an opportunity to grow out supply chain. You're going to need additional assets. Those barges that you see behind you, or the barge you see behind you, doesn't exist today. The other thing that we're going to need is you're going to need tugboats, you're going to need anchor handling vessels, you're going to probably need SOVs as well. All of those in our capacity to be able to deliver, as we have our own engineering team that is located up in Seattle, supported by our construction management team as well. We have partnered for quite some time with Cal Poly Humboldt and College of the Redwoods to help work on a workforce training program and curriculum, and also certification that we would do with our GWO Global Wind Organization partner, known as New Tech, and look to announce something with the school here, hopefully by second quarter timeframe. Yeah, and I think that's really about it, Nancy. Again, just excited to have the opportunity to be here. We're in the midst, just so everybody is aware, we posted the job yesterday for a program director who will work for me and be a liaison with the Harbor District and also for community outreach. We also expect to name our community outreach consultant by the end of this week. We are finalizing a lease for property that will be our office down in Old Town Eureka that we found last week. So we will have a base of operations. The team will be up there. And when I say the team that's located mostly on the East Coast, will be up there at least once a week, every month. Our next trip will be the week of, I think, February the 13th to participate in the crab feed. And we look forward to meeting everybody on the call, either at the crab feed or in further meetings that we have with the chamber or in other sessions as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeff. I look forward to meeting you in person because I don't think we've done so yet, but really appreciate the overview of your role in all of this. And as you said, we'll continue to bring you into the conversation wherever we as a chamber can do so. Thank you again for your time.
Absolutely. No problem.
Great. And so next we are going to invite Erin, Kester, and Ross Tyler to share. They are with RWE Renewables. So Erin and Ross, are you ready?
I think so. I'm gonna just kick it off and then I'm gonna hand it over to Ross to explain more about RWE, who we are and what we do. But hello, everyone. My name is Erin Kester. I am the Director of Government Relations for RWE Renewables. I'm based on the West Coast and really excited for this opportunity to be with you today and this opportunity to kick off a new industry in the County of Humboldt and in your region. We're looking forward to getting integrated into the community and working with all of you to make these projects that are very conceptual in nature right now a reality. So just want to thank Nancy and the Chamber for welcoming us with open arms and all of you to being part of this conversation today. We're really excited about your interest and we have been hearing from a lot of you. We are working on getting back to many of you who have reached out and it looks like Ross needs to be unmuted. But I also want to thank Rob and Jeff for their wonderful overviews. Rob really filled in a lot of what offshore wind is and what you might expect for the port in the region in terms of constructing elements that we're going to need to get big pieces of machinery in the water. So they really gave a wonderful overview. And with that, I'm just gonna hand it over to Ross Tyler, who's our lead developer on the project, and he'll be able to tell you more about RWE and what our plans are.
Thanks, Erin. Just doing a sound check. Can I be heard all right?
Yeah.
Excellent, right. And Nancy, thank you very much for hosting this. It's a wonderful opportunity to further extend our introduction into the community, which we take very seriously. And so thank you very much for this opportunity. So just a little bit to start with about RWE. We're an international organization that has about 10 gigawatts of clean energy generation in our existing portfolio. And it's spread throughout the world, but we've got most of it actually in Europe, and that is with primarily offshore wind. And but we have a lot of the about 40% of our portfolio is actually here in the US, which is some of the other clean energy technologies, such as the onshore wind, the solar, and energy storage. So we come to the US market with strong ambitions to really grow offshore wind for the US market, but with the history of having at least 30 years of operations and maintenance and deployment experience in Europe. So this is not new to us, and we're delighted to be here in the US advancing offshore wind for the nation, for California, and of course, we're looking forward to doing it for the Humboldt County community as well. So in the US, we've already made some really strong strides to develop offshore wind. We've been very successful last year in securing the lease of the New York Bight. Excuse me. And we also have a project in Maine, which will be a floating offshore wind facility. And of course, we're really thrilled that we were successful in winning the lease off the coast of one of the areas off the coast of Humboldt. We value technology. We are agnostic in terms of the different floaters. Rob did an excellent job of showing some of the floaters there. We have about 80 to 90 different floating technologies that are in our portfolio that we're evaluating, and we will make our final decision right at the last minute because that technology is constantly changing. But as an organization, we really embrace innovation in technology. And for example, we are working already on recycling of offshore wind blades. We are working with the vibration of pile driving, which is not necessarily relevant for the West Coast because, as Rob explained, it's deep water, but for where it's fixed bottom in shallower water, we're very mindful of the environment. And so we're using different technologies to make sure there is reduced noise to protect the mammals and other endangered species. We're also looking at a technology which is really a self-erecting crane system that would actually lift those turbines up onto the top of the towers. That's really very innovative and at early stages, as well as looking at generating of green hydrogen from offshore wind. So we are moving to have offshore wind as part of creating clean electrons, but also clean molecules as well. Just for completeness, I think it's important to share that the area that we have, that'll be our responsibility, will be the area that's closest to shore. So we look forward to developing that. And I think it's also important to just keep, to have a sort of a high level holistic view of how important this project is, not just for Humboldt and not just for RWE, but there is now a real growth in offshore wind on a global basis. This is going to be a clean energy technology that is being adopted by many, many countries, including some of the emerging market countries. And there is a forecast that there could be up to 240 gigawatts of floating offshore wind in the world by 2045. And then if we take what Governor Newsom has projected for California, California is going to have a really important part of that. That will be 10% of the global needs, which means that the California will have a real significant seat at the floating offshore wind technology table. And this is good for the state, and it's good for the country, and it's good for the world as well. We come with a whole slew of experiences that we have invested in some demonstration projects. One is in the North Coast, sorry, in the North Sea. Another one is in the Atlantic, and as I've already mentioned, we're investing and developing a project in Maine. I'd like to just sort of maybe align some expectations with some timelines here, because we are, as Rob has shown, there's a lot of development work that needs to take place here. So offshore wind turbines are not going to be built in the harbor starting tomorrow and be finished by the end of the week. This is going to be a multi-year development project. I mean, we have a whole list of things that need to be done, including actually signing the lease with BOEM, which we hope to happen within the first quarter of this year. But one of the other things that we will be doing is really commencing our local and inclusive outreach to the community and doing that in earnest. And we really want to have a two-way dialogue as an ongoing flow of communication between the community and ourselves. And I'm sure CIP, as the other developer for the other area, will feel the same way. We have to do plans. We have to submit the plans to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. These plans will take a lot of time, and a lot of detail needs to be put in there. And there will be opportunities, formal opportunities for extended public engagement in that process as well. We're going to have to do site investigations. We're going to look at the ocean floor, map everything out, match it up to the different technologies. We have to do front-end engineering. We also have to do some advocating to actually be able to sell the power of utility scale. And we also are going to be advocating for infrastructure improvements, including the transmission. So there's a great deal of work to be done. And this is all ready to actually do the deployment. And Rob, you're to be commended. Your presentation was very clear, very understandable, excellent graphics. And once we have got to all of that and we do the deployment, we hope that this offshore wind farm will be in existence for at least 30 years. And at that point, we need to have an operations and maintenance facility with local technicians going out servicing those offshore wind turbines for 30 years. And then at the end of 30 years, then we will have to do an evaluation. We'll have to either repower it, put some larger turbines and larger floaters out there, or we will have to decommission it. And it's our intention to be very responsible for the environment and do the job properly. One last thing, which is that we actually, as RWE, we have established a virtual classroom. And Nancy, maybe at the end, if it's of interest, I can send you the link where anybody in the community can click on that link and basically see a very similar presentation that Rob has provided, giving some details of floating offshore wind. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity. And I hope that gives people a little insight as to who RWE is. And we look forward to meeting everybody in person.
Great. Thanks so much, Erin and Ross. Really appreciate your candor and your openness to community dialogue and your partnership for our community. And Ross or Erin, if you'd like to go ahead and put that link directly into chat, looks like Erin already did. And if you want to send it to me as well, I can share more broadly as well. So thank you again for sharing with us. Next, I would like to invite Christian Scorzoni from CIP to join us. And I don't know if you have a presentation, Christian, but if you just want to share, I'm trying to highlight Ross. Let me find Christian. There you are. And I will replace Spotlight. So there you are. Christian, you're on the big screen.
Hey everybody. Nancy, thank you for hosting me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of you. So just real quick, my name is Christian Scorzoni, and I'm the new head of external affairs for the company Vineyard Offshore. That might sound a little confusing. So let's see if I can fix that for you. I just started in this job probably about 3 weeks ago, so I'm relatively new in the position. I am based in Boston, but I have been a consultant for Vineyard Offshore now for close to 7 years. Vineyard Offshore, the company itself, was launched in 2021, and essentially we were the project team behind Vineyard Wind. Vineyard Wind is the nation's first large-scale wind project. It's currently in construction. It's 14 miles off the coast of Massachusetts, and we're excited to deliver this project by the end of this year. So we're very proud of the work that we've been doing on the East Coast. I'll tell you a little bit about CIP. CIP is the largest renewable energy investment fund in the world. They've got about $20 billion of assets under management, and they are looking to grow fairly significantly. So they are planning to deploy over $100 billion in green energy investments within the next 10 years. And Vineyard Offshore is their offshore wind development arm in the US. So we have been working on behalf of the investment funded CIP to build offshore wind projects for them. Again, starting with Vineyard Wind, which we're quite excited about. So as part of Vineyard Wind, that's been the project that's helped kickstart things on the East Coast. We're very proud of the work that we've done securing the first project labor agreement in the US. We've had very strong relationships talking with stakeholders, local tribes, the higher ed, small business community, and others. And so we're very engaged in talking to stakeholders and trying to help build out the supply chain. And we've put a lot of work in developing our projects over the last couple of years, and now we're starting to see the fruits of that labor as it's getting deployed now. So we've also developed a few other projects, both in Connecticut and Massachusetts as well, with our partners at Avangrid before we separated, but we're very proud of the work that we've done in the Northeast. And then I think, as Ross and Erin mentioned too, similar to what they've done, we have also secured additional lease areas. We have a lease area at Vineyard Northeast, which is also off the coast of New England, beyond the project that we're doing at Vineyard Wind. And then on top of that, we too were also successful in securing a lease area for the New York Bight that sits off the coast of New York and New Jersey. And so collectively, with the lease areas that we have over in the Northeast, we have the capability of developing enough clean energy for about 2.4 million homes in the Northeast, which we're very excited about. And just like our partners at RWE, we have bid into markets, including New York last week as well too. So we're quite excited. We're very happy about the industry and the potential it has. We've seen a lot of supply chain activities take place, and there's really a lot of excitement, and we're very happy to come to California and to bring that. Just real quick, I'll just hit on a few other points on Vineyard Wind, just so you folks have it. It's an 806 megawatt project, and then that project itself will supply power for about 400,000 homes. We have 62 turbines. The 13 megawatt turbines, they are the GE Hiliad X, which is about a 260 meter height. I saw the presentation that Rob did. It was very well done, very thorough. I think I learned a lot on my end there as well too. And so that project is, like I said, it's underway, and so we're quite excited about it. As you know, we were successful in securing a lease out in Humboldt County with our neighbors at RWE in December. So we do have a provisional lease. It's 562, as you guys know. It's about 69,000 acres, and it's 17 miles off the coast with roughly 1,000 megawatt capacity. So we're relatively new to the game. I think many of you know our partners. We've been working quite a bit with Magellan. And they too have been working to advance our project as partners, and you may have seen them in the local community. We are in the process of hiring up our team out in California too, so you will be seeing us more often in the weeks and months ahead. I should also add that we have expertise, global expertise on floating. CIP does. They have over actually 5,000 megawatts of floating projects that are currently in process in Europe, particularly in Scotland and Italy. And so we're quite bullish on floating, and we look forward to working with our partners at Crowley. As Jeff said, we know the Crowley team quite well. They are very capable. They've done a lot of great work on the East Coast. We're looking forward to partnering with them on the West Coast as well. So that's our team in a nutshell. Like I said, you'll see more from us. We pride ourselves on reaching out to the local community, hearing more about your concerns as we think about project development. Ross and Erin, I know we've gotten very close over the last few weeks since the BOEM provisional leases were awarded. And we're thinking a lot about some of the same issues regarding stakeholder engagement, making sure we maximize supply chain opportunities locally, working with the port, and then making sure that some of these regulatory issues, broader issues regarding procurement, port infrastructure upgrades, and transmission assets are developed so that we can bring these projects to market. But we're quite excited, and hopefully in the weeks and months ahead, you'll see a lot more of us. I too will be in Humboldt in the next couple of weeks to say hi to everybody and be at the crab feed as well too. So I'll be looking out for many of you here, and happy to answer any questions that you guys have.
Great. Thanks so much, Christian. So question on my mind, how do we refer to you all here in Humboldt? So I'm hearing Vineyard, I'm hearing CIP, I'm hearing California North. How should we refer to you kind of as a collective entity?
Yeah, it's a fair point. So CIP and Vineyard Offshore. So we're the team. CIP, Vineyard Offshore. Either one of those works for us.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. And Christian, I look forward to meeting with you when you're here.
Same here, Nancy. Thank you.
Great. So thanks for hanging in. I know it's a lot of information being shared with you, and we truly appreciate the speakers that we've had so far. So the next two are pretty familiar faces for you. Scott Adair from the county is going to share with us. We've just doing a time check. We've got about a half an hour left. And we want to make sure that we allow time for Q&A at the end. And I have been collecting some questions that have come up in chat. And one thing that I noted in chat, but want to say it verbally here, if you have a question to ask and you're too shy or uncomfortable to ask it, just message it to me privately in chat, and I am glad to ask it on your behalf. So with that, Scott, go ahead and do your thing.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Nancy, for the opportunity. My name is Scott Adair, and I'm the Director of Economic Development for the County of Humboldt. And I'm going to go ahead and start a slideshow presentation here, if I may, for everybody. Sorry about that. Is that visible for everyone? Great. So you've heard a lot about offshore wind and the basic fundamentals of offshore wind in California, how wind farms work. I'm going to try to gloss over some of those details. Some of the content in our presentation, it duplicates and is redundant to some of the content in other presentations because we're trying to educate our partners in the community and stakeholders with consistent messaging and consistent data around offshore wind. So if there's something that I think has already been covered by one of the previous presenters, I'll just go ahead and skip through it. And I know that we're short on time, so I'll try to move at lightning speed. Who is the county's economic development team? We also go by GoHumCo, and we are an office of the county administrative office. We're a division under the county administrative office, and our purview, our responsibility is to administer programs and to manage strategies and initiatives related to the county's comprehensive economic development strategy, which includes workforce development. We are the fiscal agent for all of the federal workforce development dollars which come into the county. Those dollars flow into our organization as the sub-grantee and fiscal agent. All of the WIOA funds that we receive from the state, from EDD, are actually pass-through dollars from the federal government. And then we contract out with other entities and providers to provide workforce services for the community, and we provide oversight and monitoring of the programs that they administer on our behalf. And that's really where our agency comes into play and what our role is in this discussion. Our agency, we manage a number of other initiatives and programs and projects which are related to economic development. But for offshore wind, our workforce program, our workforce board, those workforce initiatives, and then other general supply or business support initiatives which lean into supply chain matters are other things that we've been working on. So I'm going to skip over wind as a federal initiative. I think Rob did a great job covering where this is coming from and who the proponents are of offshore wind and the legislation behind it. And I think Rob similarly did a great job of explaining how this is not just a federal initiative, but it's a statewide initiative as well. And that the governor is supporting offshore wind development as a means to move our future to a point where we will be free of fossil fuels. They have laid out some very ambitious goals which have been discussed here. Again, not repeating those in too much detail, but by 2045, the state is looking to have 100% of its energy use coming from clean sources. And there is a goal to have 25 gigawatts of offshore wind power generation by 2045. We've already talked about the wind resources and why Humboldt County is such a prime area for wind. This is a great chart which is available online through NREL. That's the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, their toolkit that they provide for public use. You can see the density of wind resources here off of our coastline, right off of Humboldt County, which makes us an ideal location for it. My other partners went into a little bit more detail about the call areas and where they're located. This is an image from Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, which shows the proximity of the call areas to both Humboldt County and San Luis Obispo County. And I'm sure that many of you have heard or read about just some of the generalized statistics around wind turbines and the amount of energy output that they can create, and have probably seen that termed in examples such as, how many homes per year, for example, a 12 megawatt turbine could power, which in this case, this model for this GE 12 megawatt turbine is approximately 16,000 homes per year. Rob covered the size of these and the scope and magnitude and just how large they are. This is important from a workforce perspective because it gives you an idea of the labor that's going to be needed to assemble these and to tug them out to the call area. And just assembling the components and putting the tower on the platform and the nacelle on the tower and affixing the blades. I mean, it's all going to be very labor intensive. Yeah, I like to share this visualization only because we talk about the magnitude and the scope of how large these are. And here's a comparison of 12 and 15 megawatt turbine next to the Golden Gate Bridge. And there's a lot of concern about how large they'll appear at sea. This was a visual simulation that Bureau of Ocean Energy Management did for, I don't know if there's a 12 or a 15 megawatt turbine, but out at the call area, you can see that although they're very large, they're very far away and they're very difficult to see or observe from the shoreline. So is it happening? Is it in our future? Well, I think the fact that we have two of the wind developers here on this presentation today, I think, yeah, it's happening. The lease auction has concluded, the developers have been selected, and they're moving toward executing a lease with Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. I won't introduce the developers of who they are because they're here today and they did that already. I know we've talked a little bit about timelines already. I won't focus on this too much, but we really are at the beginning of this process. This red arrow here indicates approximately where we're at, just past it because the auction is concluded. There's a lot of work to do and a lot of engagement that is still going to occur and a lot of opportunity for input and collaboration. Even though it seems very massive and approaching a magnitude in terms of opportunity, economic opportunity, like which we've never seen, we do have time to work together. This is an analogy that we like to use. As we move toward offshore wind, you have all of these agencies, all of these shareholders and stakeholders in the community, these different departments or community benefit organizations or government entities who are moving toward offshore wind together like a fleet of vessels. And each of us has our own role and scope and responsibility. And even though we're working in tandem together, each of our ships are unique, has different capabilities, different levels of staff, and we have a different mission and purpose in mind. By the way, very proud at how I seamlessly photoshopped this together. You can barely tell that I put these two images together, and I am available for hire if you want me to do any photoshopping for any wedding photos or other family photos that you might have. So now, skipping through all of that in the beginning because it was really covered well by the other partners, let's talk about workforce. I love these images because you see the workforce in action. We see a lot of images of the turbines themselves and what they look like. We don't realize quite how large they are and what it's going to take to operate and maintain them once they're installed. This picture here is actually small. The size of the turbines that we're looking at putting out to sea, the nacelles are larger than the one you see here. You can see that two people can fit inside of this one. A 15 megawatt turbine, the nacelle can have, depending on who the manufacturer is, some of those nacelles have sleeping quarters and restrooms inside of them for personnel. That's how large they are. So what are we doing from a workforce perspective? From a workforce perspective, I talked a little bit earlier about the county and its role. The county is the fiscal agent for workforce funding that comes into the community, or at least federal workforce funding, which is WIOA, or derived from WIOA sources. There are other workforce grants which other partners apply for and use for some of their own workforce activity in the community, and we can get into that a little bit later. But really what we have done is formed a coalition of different workforce partners. And the coalition includes our partners at Cal Poly, Sponsored Programs Foundation, College of the Redwoods, Humboldt County Office of Education, etc. And we work together, even though there is no contractual instrument or legal document that's been put into effect for this coalition. Everyone works together collaboratively toward the sharing of resources and exchange of information so that we can work toward a coalescing of workforce development strategies, including strategies for offshore wind. Other entities who we work with regularly include entities at the state level, the Employment Development Department, also the California Workforce Development Board. We work directly with Department of Labor, U.S. Commercial Service, International Trade Administration, NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. We also work with Select USA, Department of Commerce, and others, and have also been working with NREL and BOEM on building the proper amount of support that we need in the community for offshore wind. So in terms of workforce development, we really don't have to reinvent the wheel so much in terms of assessing and analyzing what is going to be needed, because other agencies have done a really good job doing that already. NREL has put together a very comprehensive offshore wind workforce assessment, which is workforce focused. And there's a lot of great information in there about our project or about national level projects in the industry in general, from which we can derive data in order to develop some findings for our own project. And based on analyses that we've run and then working with our partners, we believe that the project could create up to 4,200 jobs over all the phases of the project. And just 800 to 1,000 of those jobs alone will be needed for port development and other just general construction projects in order to support this industry. So what are the types of jobs that are going to be needed? We look at jobs, job classifications by SOC code, which is a standard occupational classification code, which enables us by using data through Bureau of Economic Analysis and also BLS, which is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and then also with data that's provided by EDD and other agencies to identify what our labor pool is for the type of workers that are going to be needed. This chart here is reflective of a call that we received from a tier 2, I believe it was a tier 2 manufacturer and or operator, and they had an interest in just one very specific aspect of offshore wind work, and they provided to us the types of operators and crane operators that they would need. And you can see scaffolders, bolting operators, coating inspectors, welders, etc. Wide variety of classifications that would be required just for this one small 67-person component or aspect of the project. New Jersey put together a really good workforce analysis that our team has also been looking at. They did so in partnership with a consultant out of California and also working with other East Coast stakeholders. And this really aligns with some of the findings that NREL put together or from NREL's workforce analysis report. And this graph here gives you an idea as to the types of or the variation of the types of jobs that are going to be required, whether it's 3,000 jobs or 4,000 jobs. This gives us an understanding as to which categories those SOC code classifications are going to fall into, the bulk of which being in the production side of the project. This is just another analysis from a 2019 document, so it's a little dated. Especially in terms of offshore wind, but this gives an idea on the total direct and indirect and induced jobs that would be created for a 5 gigawatt project and an 18 gigawatt project. and then what those temporary construction and then future O&M or operation and maintenance job numbers would look like. And we're also tracking the level of education that's required for some of these jobs, so that as we build workforce programs to support them, we understand better what the variances are between skilled, semi-skilled, and unskilled labor needs, so that we can work with our workforce partners to put together the right training programs and curriculum to support the industry. I'm just like blasting through all of this. So if anyone wants a copy of this slide deck, happy to provide it later. Or if anybody wants just to reach out and have deeper discussion about any of the data on any of these slides, happy to do that. I'm just trying to be cognizant of time. This is a sample job job description, which lays out some work experience requirements and educational requirements for one offshore wind position. Just put it here for interest. I can skip over that. This is a really interesting bit of data. We talk about the amount of jobs that are going to be created for the port development, and then the O&M jobs that are going to be created for operating the wind farm once all the turbines are installed. But we don't talk about or think much about the number of vessels that are going to be required in order to support and service this industry. You can see here, this is an industry analysis of for 2,100 turbines, the number of vessels that would be required in order to support that project. An SOV, or a service operation vessel, which is pictured here, just this vessel alone can have up to 40 personnel on board. And you can see that the industry would need 11 of these vessels to support the placement of 2,100 turbines. I mentioned earlier the size of the workforce that is going to be needed in order to support this project, or to support wind. If you look back at that picture, which I showed earlier, Rob has shown it. This is a popular picture that we like to use. The size of this platform and the size of the little tiny people down here gives you an idea of the army, essentially, of labor, which is going to be required in order to construct these. And within that workforce will be electricians. Now, we have electricians in the community, but it's likely with the number of electricians that we have that it would utilize a significant ratio of the current labor pool or the labor force that's participating in the work pool from an electrician standpoint in order to support the project, meaning we would have to train more electricians. Well, you can see here that in order to become an electrician in the state of California, one has to put in more than 8,000 or 700 hours of classroom time, 8,000 hours of on-the-job experience, have been enrolled in an actual recognized program, work under a certified electrician, take an exam, etc. And this can take an individual 4 to 5 years to become an electrician. And the cost of that individual is just over $17,000 roughly. So you can imagine now that there does appear to be, even though we've got a lot of time left, it doesn't mean that there's no work to do. We need to start working now on identifying what labor positions are going to be required, what that gap analysis is for our region. And I talk here about this poll area. Ideally, we'd love for all of the jobs to be Humboldt County residents, but we understand that we may be polling from elsewhere in the region for some of these positions with, according to this chart, a density of labor in the Bay Area who meet some of the education and training requirements for some of those SOC code classifications that we talked about. But we would like to train as many workers here as is possible to engage in the project, and that's something that we're working on now.
Hey, Scott, I hate to interject here, but we've got about 10 minutes left. And I wanted Matthew to at least briefly talk about the impact to our local energy grid.
No problem. Why don't I skip ahead? You're okay. You're okay. This is a big discussion. So if anyone wants to reach out to me to talk about the psychographics of offshore wind jobs and the social cognitive career theory and how that plays into putting people into this industry, happy to have that conversation. We're also working on some supply chain stuff. Skip. Let me get to, okay, so what are we doing? Presently, we're working to help educate the public at opportunities like this to talk about workforce and our workforce efforts. We're offering education. Our agency sponsors the CERC Offshore Wind for Private Sector Partners meeting, which occurs bi-weekly on Fridays. We've been either taking part in or co-hosting or facilitating regular meetings and focus groups with offshore wind stakeholders. We've been very engaged in county legislative efforts around offshore wind and have been providing input and feedback to CEC, CPUC, and others, governor's office, et cetera, and employing our lobbyists there. Our workforce development board has formed an offshore wind ad hoc committee. We're working on an industry analysis to identify workforce development opportunities and needs around offshore wind so that we can update the county's local workforce development plan. The EFID, which is the county's Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District, is also moving toward contracting for an infrastructure scoping analysis to be completed, and that's going to be done in tandem with the Harbor District. We're working with other partners like NREL and BOEM and KidWind to identify existing wind education programs and curriculum, which has already been developed that we don't necessarily have to redevelop, but that we can borrow from and utilize in our region. And then we continue through the Humboldt Workforce Coalition to support and engage with other educational partners like HCOE, CR, and Cal Poly to create tailored programs for the region's needs. So I think I'll end with, in May, we're having an event called RCEA, which is Partnering for Ocean Wind and Energy Renewables in California. That's May 10th through 12th. Take a screenshot now, and if you want to know more about that, feel free to reach out to me. And okay, I'm done. So I tried to go quickly, Nancy. There you go.
I know. And, you know, Scott, I would love to have you back to talk about the county economic development strategy, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And overall workforce projections and needs for our area. That would be, I think that would be a really worthwhile conversation for our chamber members as well. So thanks so much for zooming through that, and we will not put you, you know, near the end as next time. Matthew, sorry that you're at the end, but if you could at least briefly address, you know, kind of what is the anticipated impact on our local power grid.
And I'll go fast with my negative 23 minutes to talk.
There
so,
you
know, I just wanted to highlight maybe two things of like, where's the electricity going to go and how's it going to get there? You know, and so I think those are kind of the key takeaways. And so I'll skip over, you know, we've been around since 2003. And most significantly, since 2017, we've been buying electricity on behalf of 90% of the customers in Humboldt County. And so, you know, we partner with PG&E. So we have the supply side. PG&E still delivers it to the customers, but that gives us local control over where our electricity is coming from. This is increasingly the norm in California. So there's over 11 million people that are now served by programs like ours. And so, you know, that's sort of who are the buyers? We have the opportunity, and why we and all these other communities are doing it is to be able to have local control to say we want more renewable energy, we want lower rates, which we've been able to maintain. And we want to be able to support community development and community investment. And so, you know, locally for RCEA, our goal is to maximize the use of local renewable energy. And so obviously you've seen the map, best resource in the entire country. So that's a big part of it. The technology's there. We've been working on this since 2016. We actually submitted a proposed lease area in 2018 to BOEM. I won't go into the history, but looking forward at the state goals, which you heard about, they're looking at, you know, only about 120 megawatts in Humboldt, because that's what you wouldn't need for transmission by 2030. But to get to the 2045 goal, we're going to need those additional Crescent City and, you know, south of Humboldt areas that Rob sort of pointed to. And so the state's goals really require that, a much fuller build out of the North Coast area beyond just the Humboldt wind energy area. But to do anything, even the current area beyond 160 megawatts, which a megawatt, 1,000 megawatts is a gigawatt, is going to require major transmission upgrades. And so, when we look at 163 megawatts is the size of the King Salmon PG&E power plant, and not coincidentally, that power plant is about the size of what you need to power Humboldt County. So about 10% of the size of the Humboldt wind energy area is enough wind to power Humboldt County. What that looks like, it's about 10 turbines. So this is a rendering of what a wind farm that could power Humboldt County would look like. And again, that's only about a tenth of the scale of just the current area, not counting those other North Coast region resources. And so the issue is, well, okay, we can only use about 10% of that locally. That's what our current grid can sort of absorb into the community. How do we get out of here? And if you think of the grid, there's really, I use a road analogy. So we've got big transmission lines that move power across the state. That's your highways. You've got substations, which are the off ramps. And then you've got the distribution, which is your city, street, and county roads. And if you look at a map of the transmission lines in Humboldt County, I'm not going to go through these in detail, but we've got two sort of small highways that go east out of Humboldt County. There's another little one that kind of goes along next to that. There's another small, very small transmission line that goes south to Mendocino. That's the one that's been giving our community a lot of trouble as far as getting new customers connected. But if you look at all of these lines, what we have are, similar to our local highways, we have very limited transmission capabilities compared to what is needed to move this state national scale power out of Humboldt County. And so when you look at, how's the power going to get from Humboldt County, the state is now begun planning for transmission upgrades and looking at, multiple different ways to get the power from here to the Bay Area. So a little bit of it, hopefully the first tranche is going to come to Humboldt County. But I think when we're thinking about this project from a, the overall scale of it, there's really three pieces. There's the wind farms in the ocean. There's the harbor work, which again is going to probably happen even if there was no Humboldt area. But then there's also the transmission infrastructure, which is its whole own, development and jobs opportunity that is going to be needed to hit the state goals. And so, this is sort of that simplified version of that timeline to seeing California wind online by 2030. But if we're going to have this timeline, be for the Humboldt area, when we're actually going to see wind turbines out off the coast, the transmission timeline, which can often be a 10-year process, needs to be sort of synced up with this BOEM development process. So I'll just leave it at that and can spend a little bit of time, hopefully, on questions.
All right, we have exactly 2 minutes left for questions, which is unfortunate, but in that limited amount of time, I want to invite everybody on the call I'm going to just have you send your questions to me. We have a list of people who are on this call. When you registered, we captured your email addresses, and that's how we sent you the link. So we will go ahead and collect questions. Go ahead and email them to me. My email is simple. It's nancy@eurekachamber.com. To make sure that goes to everyone. So nancy@eurekachamber.com. So you can send your questions to me. And I will get them answered, and I will send out those answers to everybody on this call. So I apologize. Note to self, ambitious agendas are always the bane of my existence. So with that, I'm looking at my notes. Scott, if you want to send the information about the May 10th to 12th, that would be great. And for those who asked questions in chat and you didn't get them answered, I did make note of them. So we will make sure that we get those answers to you as well. Big thanks to everybody who participated. We're really happy with the number and the broad spectrum of people who participated. And thanks to Rob, Jeff, Erin, Ross, Christian, Scott, and Matthew for speaking today. And like I said, we will answer any questions that you send to me. Go ahead and email them. We will send you a copy of the recording in that email as well. And anybody who wants to share slides, especially Rob, Matthew, Scott, let us know if you want us to include those slides as well. Thank you again for participating. Next conversation with leaders is, like I said, at the end of February, we're going to be sending that information out, and that will be around, kind of Eureka specific business safety and what's happening from the city level to support and address the houseless who are living on our streets, and many related topics. So thanks everyone for joining us for our inaugural conversation with leaders, and to all of the leaders who participated in sharing their wisdom and knowledge with us. Thanks everyone.